I paid for my daughter's big 40th birthday bash, but in the heat of the celebration, she leaned in and hissed into my ear, "Get your tail to the kitchen. I brought you here to scrub dishes, not to dance." I swallowed my pride and walked away, but I left my phone on the head table with the voice recorder running. I didn't hit play until 2 days later. Good Lord, just in time, because I only had 15 minutes left to save my own life. The ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, honey-glazed ham, and pure hypocrisy. I stood by a pillar trying to blend into the beige wallpaper, watching my hard-earned money turn into a loud, raucous party that I had absolutely no part in. The crystal glasses shimmering under the chandeliers, the live jazz band playing standards, and even those massive arrangements of white lilies on every table. All of it was paid for by my last major investment bond. That was my rainy day fund, my shield against old age, which I had voluntarily laid at the feet of my daughter, Simone, for her 40th birthday. I had hoped this gesture, extravagant, reckless, and soul-crushing for my bank account, would finally melt the ice between us. I dreamed that today, on her milestone birthday, she would look at me not as an embarrassing footnote in her biography, but as her mother. I was dead wrong. To the guests, I was a ghost sliding between the tables. To my own daughter, I was somewhere between a prop and the hired help. Simone was radiant. She wore a deep emerald silk dress that hugged her curves and diamond earrings that caught every spark of light. Her husband, Silas Vandiver, hovered near her. There was always something about his shifty eyes and frantic movements that made my skin crawl, like I was looking at a rodent that had somehow found its way into a tuxedo. He kept pouring wine for the guests, laughing too loud, and cutting side eyes at me. He looked like a man making sure the basement door was locked on a pile of junk he intended to throw out. I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. The habit of keeping my back straight had stayed with me since the years I spent as the principal of a youth reform academy. "Hold it together, Evangeline Abernathy," I told myself. "It's her night. Just be there." Then the band started playing a slow waltz, my favorite. A melody full of tenderness and a touch of blues floated over the room. For a moment, I didn't feel like a retiree being tolerated out of politeness. I felt like the woman I used to be. Strong, respected, a leader. I saw Simone standing alone in the center of the floor, basking in the admiration, and I decided to take a chance. I stepped forward with a shy, hopeful smile. I walked toward my daughter, ready to pull her into an embrace, ready to share this dance as a bridge over the canyon of our silence. The music didn't stop, but the world did. Simone grabbed my elbow. Her fingers, tipped with long, sharp acrylics, dug into my arm, and a jolt of pain shot through my shoulder. She leaned in, her face twisting from a socialite's smile into a mask of pure disgust. "Get your tail to the kitchen," she hissed, so low that only I could hear, but with enough venom to make my blood run cold. "I brought you here to scrub dishes, not to dance." The guests nearby looked away, suddenly very interested in their plates. Silas, standing a few feet away, smirked and took a long sip of his drink. In that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't the sound of a breaking heart. No, my heart is made of tougher stuff. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. I felt a glacial chill spread through my chest. In that 1 second, while her nails were buried in my skin, the loving, forgiving mother in me died. Her place was taken by Evangeline Abernathy, the woman who could silence a hallway of troubled teenagers with a single look. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I slowly pried her hand off my arm. My face turned into a mask, calm, impenetrable, and terrifyingly polite. "Whatever you say, Simone," I said, my voice steady. I turned toward the kitchen, but before I left, I made one small move. My smartphone was sitting on the head table, tucked behind a vase of lilies. I had turned on the recorder 10 minutes earlier. I was a foolish old woman, hoping to capture the toasts. I wanted to save the kind words I thought they would say about me. Now the phone stayed there, hidden by the thick leaves and flowers, invisible to the drunken eyes of the guests, continuing to record. I didn't pick it up. In that state of shock and cold fury, I forgot about it for hours. I spent the rest of the night at the industrial sink. Hot water, grease from strangers' plates, an endless parade of dirty glass. The music reached me as a dull thud, like it was coming from another world. I washed dishes at a party I had paid for with my future. With every plate I dried, my soul got harder, turning into stone. When the guests started to leave, I slipped back into the hall while Simone and Silas were seeing someone to the door. I found my phone among the wilting lilies. The little red recording light was still blinking. I hit stop, shoved it into my purse, and walked out the back exit without saying goodbye. The drive home was long. My old sedan cut through the darkness, carrying me away from the city to my only sanctuary, a heavy timbered house on the edge of the woods in the foothills. I drove in total silence. No radio, no thoughts, just the hum of the engine. I reached the estate in the middle of the night, collapsed into bed, and fell into a dreamless sleep. I spent the next 2 days in a fog, wandering through the empty rooms, unable to even look at the phone. It hurt physically to remember that night, but looking back now, I realize it wasn't just hurt that followed me home. It was a lingering, oily feeling of dread. When Simone had grabbed my arm, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't just the irritation of a spoiled daughter. I saw a cold, calculating glint. That wasn't how you look at a mother you're annoyed with. That was how a predator looks at prey that's already in the trap. If I had known then what that look meant, I wouldn't have gone home. I would have gone straight to the police station. 2 days later, I was sitting in my heavy oak armchair, my palms wrapped around a hot mug of tea. The house was silent. The quiet was so thick I could almost hear the dust settling on the spines of my old books. Outside the window, overgrown with wild vines, the wind stirred the tops of the pines, but inside, everything felt dead. I looked at the phone on the side table. It looked like a black monolith, holding a secret I was terrified to know but obligated to hear. I had already mentally crossed them out of my will, but I needed proof, not for a lawyer, but for myself. I needed to hear that night again to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I wanted to know if there was even a shred of warmth, one word of regret said after I walked away. Or on the contrary, I wanted the right to burn that love out of my heart for good. I reached out and pressed play. First, the speaker spit out the noise of the party, the clinking of silverware, the roar of voices, snatches of jazz. I heard my own voice, small and timid, then Simone's sharp snap. I flinched, feeling like I'd been slapped all over again. Then the rustle of fabric, footsteps moving away. That was me heading to the kitchen. The recording went on. Minutes stretched. The guests became background noise. Someone laughed, someone toasted right over the microphone. I was about to turn it off when the background changed. The music got quieter. The guests' voices faded. It seemed like someone had walked right up to the table, shielding the phone with their body. "Are you sure she's gone?" It was Simone's voice. Sober, hard, without a trace of the drunken joy she'd been faking. "She's gone," Silas answered. His voice was muffled but clear. "I watched that old bucket of bolts leave the parking lot. She didn't even say goodbye. Bitter old crow." "I don't care about her feelings," my daughter cut him off. "The only thing that matters is that she's at the house." I froze, the mug halfway to my lips. What were they talking about? Why did it matter where I was? "She'll be there," the son-in-law reassured her. "She's got nowhere else to go. She'll crawl into that den of hers and wallow in self-pity. That works in our favor." There was a pause. I could hear Silas's heavy breathing. Then he spoke again, almost in a whisper, with a terrifyingly businesslike tone. "A sudden gas leak. It's clean, Simone. The house is old. The wiring is shot. The pipes are ancient. Nobody will question a stray spark. The fire marshal will write it off as an accident." The blood drained from my face. My fingertips went numb. Every word fell into the silence of my living room like a stone into a deep well. "When?" Simone asked. There was no fear in her voice, only impatience. "Tuesday, today," Silas replied. "The technician, Nate will be at her place at exactly 5 o'clock. He's a pro. He'll cut the valve, knock her out so she doesn't suffer, or so she doesn't get in the way, whatever, and then he'll strike a match. By Wednesday, we're filing for the inheritance. That land alone is worth millions. Simone will clear the debt and have enough left for that villa in Spain. The mug slipped from my fingers. The porcelain hit the floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces, splashing my feet with hot tea. But I didn't feel the burn. I slowly, as if in a dream, turned my head toward the grandfather clock in the corner. The pendulum swung steadily. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Today was Tuesday. The hands showed 4:45. 15 minutes. I had exactly 15 minutes left to live. The world narrowed down to that clock face. 15 minutes until death knocked on my door in the form of a man named Nate. 15 minutes until my home, my fortress, became a fire trap. Panic tried to surge up, to choke me, to make me run blindly through the house. But the years of being a principal forged a different reflex in me. When disaster strikes, the emotions shut down. Cold logic takes over. Fear was a luxury I couldn't afford. I stood up. My legs felt like lead, but they held. I stepped over the broken porcelain. Where could I run? The nearest neighbors were half a mile through the woods. If he caught me on the driveway, I was a dead woman. Hide in the woods? I was too old to play tag with a professional killer. I needed help. Now. I grabbed the phone. My fingers shook, but I forced them to obey. I didn't call 911. "Hello, police? My daughter and son-in-law want to kill me." By the time the dispatcher took my info, decided if I was a senile old woman or not, and sent a cruiser from town, an hour would pass. I didn't have an hour. I dialed a number I knew by heart, even though I hadn't called it in 5 years. It was the personal line of Marcus Lockhart, a commander with the state police. 30 years ago, he was my student, a hot-headed kid they wanted to expel for fighting. I stood up for him, saved him from juvie, gave him a chance. He used to call me his second mother. The rings were long and agonizing. 1, 2. "Hello?" A familiar gravelly bass answered. "Marcus," I said. My voice was as hard as steel. "It's Evangeline Abernathy." "Ms. Abernathy?" Surprise and immediate warmth flooded his voice. "To what do I owe—" "Listen to me carefully," I cut him off. "My life is in danger. There's a hitman on his way to my house right now. Simone and Silas Vandiver ordered it. They're going to blow up the house with gas." There was a second of silence on the other end. Marcus was a professional. He didn't ask if I was sure or if I was imagining things. He heard the principal's tone, the one that didn't joke. Suddenly, through the static on the line, I heard another sound. A real-world sound. The crunch of tires on gravel. I froze, pressing the phone to my ear. My window looked out onto the driveway. The sound was getting closer. An engine cut out right at the gate. A car door slammed. I looked at the clock. 4:48. He was early. The technician hadn't waited until 5. He was already here. I didn't have 15 minutes. I didn't even have one. "Marcus," I whispered into the phone, my heart hammering in my throat. "He's here." "Barricade yourself!" Marcus roared so loud the speaker nearly cracked. In the background, I heard the crash of a chair being shoved back and the stomp of heavy boots. "Tactical team, move out, now!" Then he spoke to me again, every word a command. "Evangeline, I'm heading out personally. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone. Stay away from the windows. If he tries to get in, hit him with everything you've got. I'm coming. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said shortly and hung up. The phone landed on the sofa. I darted to the window, hidden by a heavy curtain, and carefully peeled back the edge. A man was walking up the path to the porch. He was wearing a clean, pressed gray work uniform with a patch on the chest. He carried a toolkit with confidence. He wasn't creeping, he wasn't looking around. He walked with the stride of a man doing his job, a man who knew he was expected. He looked completely harmless, an ordinary worker tired at the end of his shift. That is exactly what a perfect threat looks like. The most dangerous wolf is the one that comes in sheep's clothing. The fear that had frozen my gut just a minute ago evaporated, replaced by an icy focus. My brain was in emergency mode. Simone and Silas had made a fatal mistake. They had planned the murder of a helpless old retiree who, in their mind, was losing her wits. They forgot that this retiree had run a reform school in the 90s, back when the streets were mean and the police were afraid to answer the bell. They forgot whose blood ran in my veins. I didn't run to hide under the bed. I bolted for the foyer. My house wasn't just a cabin. It was a heritage home built by my grandfather long ago. He was a cautious, meticulous man. In the old days when things got rough, he had reinforced the doors like he was preparing for a siege. I reached the massive front door made of solid dark oak. The modern lock was flimsy, just for show, but above and below it were the true guardians of this house, hand-forged iron bolts installed nearly 100 years ago. I shoved the top bolt home with a grunt. The heavy metal slid into the slot with a dull thud. Then the bottom one. The click was so loud it seemed to echo through the whole first floor. Now, to get in here, he would need a battering ram. Hardly had I straightened up when the doorbell rang. A cheerful, mundane melody that sounded like a funeral march in that silence. I froze, my back against the wall, trying not to breathe. "Gas company!" A pleasant, well-trained baritone called from the porch. "Ma'am, please open up. We're doing a scheduled check. There's a leak in the neighborhood. We're checking the whole line." The lie was smooth, practiced. A leak in the neighborhood, a classic trick to cause panic and make someone open the door without thinking. Simone must have given him a detailed psychological profile. Old, trusting, law-abiding. They expected me to hear gas and come fluttering to the door, fussing and worrying. I slowly reached for the light switch and killed the lights in the foyer. Shadows swallowed the hallway, making me invisible. "Hey, ma'am, I know you're in there. I see the car out front." The voice got more insistent, but still held that note of professional politeness. "This is for your own safety. If we don't check, we'll have to shut off the whole block." I moved silently across the hardwood, heading for the living room where I had a view of the porch through a side window. I knew every squeaky floorboard in this house and avoided them by instinct. Standing in the shadow of the curtain, I looked out. The man was standing at the door, waiting. He adjusted his cap, shifting his weight. He had a rehearsed, friendly smile on his face, the smile of a salesman who knows exactly when you're going to buy. He was confident. He'd been told a little old lady lived here, but the door didn't open. A minute of silence stretched into an eternity, and then I saw his face change. The smile slid off like old paint. His features sharpened, his eyes narrowing into two cold slits. The nice gas man was gone. The tired worker was gone. In his place stood a predator who realized the den was locked. He slowly reached for his belt, where his tool bag hung. He didn't ring again. He didn't bang his fist or shout. He knew I was inside, and he knew I wasn't opening. An ordinary gas man would have left a notice and walked away. This man did something else. Slowly, without taking his eyes off the peephole, he unclipped a pouch on his belt and pulled out a strange, gleaming chrome tool. It wasn't a wrench or a screwdriver. It was an electric lockpick gun, a device I'd only seen on the news. He knew I was behind that door. He knew I was afraid, and he had no intention of leaving until the job was done. He stepped toward the keyhole. The whir of the electric pick pierced the silence of the house like a dentist's drill grinding into a healthy nerve. The sound was vile, persistent, vibrating in the very bones of the old timber. I saw the doorknob jiggle, metal screeching against metal. My grandfather's bolts held firm, but the modern lock I'd put in a few years ago was already giving way. If he drilled through the cylinder, the door would lose its rigidity, and all he'd have to do was put his shoulder to it. Time was up. I backed away into the hallway, feeling cold sweat roll down my spine. My fortress suddenly felt like a cardboard box in the wind. I needed a weapon. I ran to the kitchen. Irony of fate, this was where Simone had tried to humiliate me 2 days ago, turning me into a servant. Now this room was going to be my armory. I ran to the stove. Sitting on the burner was my favorite skillet, heavy, black, cast iron. When I grabbed the handle, I felt its solid weight. This wasn't just cookware. It was a heavy-duty argument. With my other hand, I yanked open the drawer and grabbed a long carving knife. The blade glinted in the dim light. Armed, I went to the wall where the old intercom handset hung, connecting the house to the gate and porch. I pressed the talk button. My finger didn't shake. "I've called the police," I said, making sure my voice was as firm as an order on a Monday morning assembly. "Leave immediately. They'll be here in 5 minutes." The buzzing at the door stopped. For a second there was silence, and I hoped the bluff had worked. But then a laugh came through the speaker, dry, scratching, devoid of any joy. "Evangeline Abernathy, don't make me laugh," the voice said, now without any mask of politeness. "Your daughter warned me you'd start imagining things. Mom has dementia," she said. "She sees burglars everywhere. That's what she told everyone. The police don't rush out for crazy old ladies who won't let the gas man in, and even if they do come, they'll only find the remains of a tragic accident." The words dementia and crazy old lady hit me like a physical blow. Simone hadn't just hired a killer. She had prepared the ground. She had methodically, in advance, destroyed my reputation so that no one, not the neighbors, not the local cops, would believe my cries for help. She had destroyed me socially before she ever tried to destroy me physically. That traitorous foresight hurt more than any knife. "Open up, Evangeline," the voice continued, getting harder. "Don't make me break a window. That'll look messy in the report. You don't want everyone thinking you fought the rescuers, do you? Do you?" I stayed silent, gripping the knife handle so hard my knuckles turned white. I wasn't going to negotiate. I was buying time. Every second brought Marcus closer. Suddenly, the scratching at the lock stopped. I heard heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. He was walking away. I darted to the kitchen window and pressed against the wall, peeking out. The gray figure stepped off the porch, but he didn't head for the gate. He turned the corner of the house, stepping through the high grass I hadn't had time to mow. Where was he going? That was a solid wall covered in vines. There were no doors, no low windows. And then it hit me. A chill of horror locked my legs. On that side of the house, right at ground level, was the old coal chute. Half a century ago, they used to dump coal through it straight into the cellar for the furnace. We'd switched to gas long ago, and the chute was boarded up, buried under old scrap wood and overgrown with bushes. Only someone who had lived in this house for decades knew about it. Simone knew. I saw the man walk straight to the pile of wood, kick it aside with 2 powerful strikes, and lean down. He knew exactly where to look. Simone had drawn him a map. She had sold him every secret of my home, every vulnerability I had protected for years. He lifted the rusted iron cover. It gave way with a sickening screech. The black mouth of the cellar opened before him like an invitation. "No," I breathed. If he got into the cellar, he was inside the perimeter. There was a staircase from the cellar up into the house. But even if I blocked the cellar door, he could do something much worse. The main gas line ran through that cellar, the main intake. If he cut the pipe down there, gas would fill the crawl space in minutes, and the old wooden floors would let that gas rise through the house instantly. The house would become a bomb, and I'd be sitting right on top of the detonator. I realized the defense of the front door was pointless now. The enemy was coming in from behind, using a secret passage opened for him by my own flesh and blood. I turned and ran toward the pantry, where the entrance to the cellar was located. This was no longer a race against time. It was a race for position. Whoever reached the top of those stairs first would be the one who survived. A metallic bang from below sounded like a gunshot. The heavy iron flap of the coal chute, unopened for decades, had yielded. I heard the dull thud of a body hitting the pile of old coal dust, followed by the crunch of boots on the black grit. He was inside. My house, which seemed so impenetrable from the outside, had a soft underbelly, and the killer had found it. Panic, cold and oily, tried to grab my throat, to paralyze my will, to make me huddle in a corner and whimper. I crushed it. Fear is a body's reaction. My mind was working with the precision of a Swiss watch. I stood in the pantry, clutching the skillet in one hand and the knife in the other, listening. The sounds below changed. The crunch of coal became hollow footsteps on the concrete floor. He wasn't heading for the stairs. He was heading for the pipes. The realization made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The cellar was the heart of the house's utilities. There, in the web of old pipes, was the main gas manifold. If he cut it there, he didn't even have to come up to face me. He didn't have to risk a struggle with a crazy old woman. Physics would do the work for him. Gas is lighter than air. It would fill the cellar, seep through the cracks in the dry floorboards, and rise, turning my heritage home into a fuel-air bomb. A single spark would be enough to blow the whole estate into splinters. The situation had flipped. This wasn't a siege anymore. It was a race with death. I couldn't just barricade the cellar door and wait for Marcus. If I locked him down there, he'd just trigger the explosion out of spite or according to plan. I had to keep him away from those pipes or force him to come up to me before he turned on the gas. The cellar entrance was in the pantry, right off the kitchen. It was a narrow, dark little room smelling of dried herbs and dust. The floor was covered by an old, worn-out rug I'd brought back from a trip years ago. Under that rug was the hatch, solid oak, built to last. I slipped into the pantry, trying not to let the boards groan. In the shadows, the jars of preserves on the shelves glinted like the eyes of watchers. I set the knife on a shelf, gripping the skillet with both hands. Then, hooking the edge of the rug with my toe, I slowly, inch by inch, slid it aside. There it was, a square of dark wood with a hand-forged iron ring set into it. The hatch didn't have a lock. It held by its own weight and friction. From below came a sound, a low, whistling tune. He was whistling a pop song. He felt completely untouchable. He was sure the helpless victim was shivering in fear upstairs. He wasn't in a hurry. He was enjoying the process like a cat that had cornered a mouse. I heard him stop at the base of the wooden stairs. The first step creaked. "Evangeline," his voice came up, muffled by the floor. "I hope you've got the kettle on. I'm coming up to discuss the rates with you." He was coming up. Thank God he was coming up. Maybe he wanted to see for himself that the job was done, or maybe he just wanted to enjoy my terror before he struck the match. His arrogance was my ally. Creak, the second step. I stood to the side of the hatch, hidden in the shadows of the shelves. I raised the skillet over my head. My arm muscles tensed, remembering the weight of school satchels and water buckets from the hard years. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a mother, and I wasn't a retiree. In that dark, dusty pantry, I was the warden, and the man climbing those stairs wasn't coming to a murder. He was walking into his cell. Creak. The third step. He was moving slowly, casually. I imagined him smirking in the dark. He probably had his tool out, or maybe a knife. He expected to find a locked door he'd have to shoulder through. He didn't expect the door to open on its own, only to be met by a wall of cast-iron fury. Creak. The fourth. He was close. I could almost hear his breathing, the rustle of his jacket against the wooden rail. My heart beat steady and strong, counting the seconds until the strike. I had to hit him the moment his head cleared the floor level. Not before, so I wouldn't spook him, and not after, so he wouldn't have time to react. One hit. Precise. Hard. Creak. The fifth step. His hand must have been about to touch the hatch from below. The silence in the house was absolute. It felt like the air itself had frozen. I held my breath, a statue of retribution. And in that exact moment, tearing the silence to shreds, the phone in my pocket came to life. A loud, upbeat R&B ringtone, one I'd set for Simone years ago because she used to love that song, blasted through the pantry like an air raid siren. I lurched, nearly dropping the skillet. The sound was deafening in the confined space. It echoed off the jars of pickles, off the wooden walls, and went straight down into the ears of the killer. I saw the screen glowing in the dark. Daughter, Simone. The irony was so monstrous that for a split second, I froze. She wasn't calling to say she was sorry. She was calling to see if I was dead yet. She was calling to check if the plan had worked. And with that call, she betrayed me for a second time, this time for good. The ringing gave away my position to the inch. The creaking of the stairs stopped instantly. The silence below was replaced by a predatory tension. He realized. He heard the music right above his head. He knew I wasn't hiding in the bedroom under the covers. I was standing right over him, at the very exit. "There you are, Mama," a voice whispered from below, no longer cheerful, very close, right under the floorboards. The hatch cover jolted. A powerful blow from below sent the heavy wood flying upward. The hatch hit a shelf of preserves, and a jar of strawberry jam exploded in a spray of red. Fingers in black leather gloves gripped the edge of the floor, followed by a face twisted with adrenaline. He was grunting with effort as he pulled himself up. His eyes found me in the shadows, and triumph flashed in them. I didn't scream. Fear was a thing of the past. From my chest came a short, sharp exhale, the sound of ultimate physical effort, like a woodsman swinging an axe into a knotted log. Ha! I put everything into that swing, the pain of betrayal, the weight of the years, the fury of a mother who had been sentenced to death. The heavy cast-iron skillet traced an arc and landed with a sickening crunch on the fingers gripping the wooden edge. The sound of metal hitting bone was dull and wet. For a heartbeat, time stopped. I saw his pupils dilate, not from pain, but from absolute impossible surprise. He didn't believe the senile old lady was capable of violence. Then the pain hit. He howled. It wasn't a human cry. It was the wail of a gut-shot animal. His fingers let go. He tried to grab the edge with his other hand, but the momentum of his fall was already pulling him down. I saw his face vanish into the darkness of the hole, like it was being washed away by black water. The crash of his fall was horrific. He hit every step of that steep staircase on the way down. The thud of his body against the wood, the clatter of his tools spilling, and then the dull thud against the concrete floor below. Then silence. I didn't wait for him to wake up. I dropped the skillet and grabbed the edge of the heavy oak hatch with both hands. It felt like it weighed a ton in that moment. My back muscles screamed, but I yanked the wood shut. It slammed down, cutting off the cellar from the house. Dust billowed into the air. I fell to my knees, hands searching the rough boards for the bolt. There it was, the old iron latch, covered in rust and a century of grime. My grandfather had built it for a reason. I pressed my palms against it, tearing my skin, and shoved with all my weight. The metal resisted, screeching, but I pushed with the desperation of the damned. "Close, you devil!" I hissed through my teeth. The rust gave way. The iron tongue slid into the slot with a clank. But that wasn't enough. The latch was old, and the man below was young, strong, and armed. If he threw his shoulder against it from below, if he had a crowbar... I looked around. In the corner of the pantry sat a bag of flour. 50 pounds. I'd bought it a month ago, planning to bake pies for Simone's birthday. What a bitter joke. Dough for the party that became my wake. I grabbed the bag by the heavy burlap ears. Pain shot through my spine, but I pulled. The bag moved an inch. I braced my feet against the doorframe, gritted my teeth until my jaw ached, and hauled. "Come on! Come on!" The bag slid reluctantly, leaving a white trail on the floor. I dragged it like a mule pulling a plow, inch by inch, until it slumped with its soft, heavy weight right onto the cellar hatch. A white cloud of flour dust rose into the air, settling on my face, my eyelashes, making me look like a ghost. Now that hatch wasn't opening from below. Even if he broke the latch, the weight of that flour would keep him pinned. In my pocket, the phone was still screaming. The upbeat R&B song in that dark pantry, smelling of dust, blood, and old jam, sounded like the soundtrack to a breakdown. From under the floor came a bang. Then another. He was hitting the ceiling of the cellar with something heavy. His voice came through muffled, distorted by the thick boards, but the rage in it was palpable. "You're dead, old woman, you hear me? I'm gonna gut you!" I slowly stood up, wiping the flour from my hands. My breathing was evening out. My heart, which had been beating like a trapped bird, now thudded heavy and rhythmic like a hammer. I pulled out the phone. The name Daughter was still pulsing on the screen. I swiped the screen, accepting the call. "Hello, Simone," I said. My own voice surprised me. It was calm, not just calm. It was dead. There was no tremor, no hysteria, no tears. It was the voice of a woman who had already crossed the line and was looking back at the world from the other side. There was a pause on the other end. Simone was expecting to hear anything else. Death rattles, a man's voice, the sound of a struggle, but she heard her mother, alive and steady. "Mom?" In her voice, there was a mix of disbelief and fear. Why did it take you so long to pick up? I was worried." The lie flowed out of her habitually, reflexively, but now I could hear the cracks in it. "I was busy," I replied, looking at the bag of flour. "I was entertaining a guest." From below, another bang, louder this time. The floorboards under my feet shook. "A guest?" Simone's voice wavered. "Mom, what are you talking about? Is everything okay? Do you smell gas?" "I don't smell gas." She wasn't even trying to hide what she knew anymore. She was rushing the timeline. "Your technician is in the cellar, Simone," I said clearly, enunciating every syllable. "He's got a broken finger, and I think he's very upset. He's having a bad day." Dead silence on the line. I could hear her frantic breathing. In the background, someone asked a question, probably Silas, but she shushed him. "Mom, are you delirious? What technician? Did you take your medicine?" She tried to pivot back to the senile old lady script, but the panic was ringing in her voice. "Enough!" I cut her off. "The play is over. I heard the recording. I heard everything about the leak, about Tuesday, about the inheritance, and how you and Silas decided to sell my life to cover your debts." "Mom, no, that's not—" "Quiet!" I barked, the way I used to on the academy drill floor. Simone choked on her words. "Listen to me very carefully. Commander Marcus Lockhart will be here in 5 minutes with a tactical team." "Marcus?" she whispered. The name of the high-ranking state police commander hit her like a bucket of ice water. "Yes. And one more thing. The recording of your conversation? I sent a copy to Mr. Whitaker, my notary, just now, while I was waiting for your killer." That was a lie. I hadn't sent anything to Whitaker. I hadn't even touched the phone until that moment. But Simone didn't know that. Fear is the best amplifier for a lie. From the cellar, a new sound emerged. Not banging, not shouting. It was a metallic screech, the sound of a pipe wrench biting into an old nut. And then, laughter. A mad, barking laugh of a man who has nothing left to lose. "Hey, up there!" the hitman yelled through the floor. "You think you won? You think you're safe? To hell with that. I'm not going down alone. We're all going up together, you old hag." I froze. "Hear that, Simone?" I asked into the phone. "Your employee has decided to improvise." "What is he doing?" my daughter shrieked. "Mom, get out of there, run!" "It's too late to run," I said. "If I survive, you're going to prison for a long time. If I die, Whitaker has the recording. You're going to prison either way, but without the inheritance. Choose, daughter. Which is scarier to you?" From below came a loud hiss, like a giant snake had woken up in the bowels of the house. The sound of gas escaping under pressure was unmistakable. He had opened the main valve. "Count the minutes, Grandma!" the hitman screamed. "One spark and it's over!" And then I felt it. At first, faint, but with every second it grew thicker and heavier. The smell, that sweet, nauseating odor of mercaptan they add to natural gas. It was seeping through the cracks between the old floorboards, through the baseboards. It was rising from the cellar like invisible death. The hitman wasn't bluffing. He had stripped the threads on the main pipe. I was standing in the middle of a gas chamber. My house, my fortress, was rapidly filling with explosives. "Mom!" Simone was screaming into the phone. "Mom, run!" I dropped the phone. 5 minutes until the police arrived. I didn't have 5 minutes. I had seconds before the gas concentration reached the critical point. A spark from the refrigerator kicking on, or static electricity from my wool sweater would be enough. I looked at the flour bag pinning the hatch. I had locked him in there, but now I had locked myself in with a bomb whose fuse was already burning. The stench of gas became unbearable. It filled my nostrils, settled as a bitter film on my tongue. I knew every moment of hesitation brought me closer to a fiery abyss. Without thinking for a second, I grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from the counter and hurled it with all my might at the kitchen window. The glass exploded in a ringing rain of shards, and a rush of cold evening air burst into the stifling, poisoned atmosphere of the kitchen. I breathed it in greedily, feeling my head clear. But I couldn't stay inside. The gas was still hissing below, filling the crawl space, soaking into the timbers. I bolted into the hallway, yanked back the bolts, the same ones that had seemed like a shield and now were a barrier to my survival. The iron gave way. I threw open the heavy door and stumbled out onto the porch, nearly tumbling down the stairs. The silence of the evening was shattered by the wail of sirens. It was getting closer, rising into a thunderous, saving symphony. The blue flashes of emergency lights were already dancing on the tops of the pines at the end of the driveway. Marcus had made it, but he wasn't the only one. From the other direction, from the highway, tires screeched. A black SUV, kicking up clouds of dust, tore into the yard, nearly taking out the gate. The car skidded and stopped 3 feet from my rose bushes. The driver's door flew open, and Silas Vandiver scrambled out. His face was white as chalk, his eyes darting. He saw me, alive, standing on the porch with a carving knife in my hand, and his jaw dropped. Then he heard the sirens. "Simone!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get in the car! Move! It's the feds!" But Simone wasn't listening. She scrambled out of the passenger seat. She was still wearing that same emerald dress from the party. Now it looked like an out-of-place, vulgar costume for a tragedy. She saw me and ran toward the porch. In her eyes, there was no remorse, only the animal terror of a cornered rat looking for any hole, any cover. "Mom!" she screamed, reaching out to me with those long, predatory nails. "Mom, thank God. He's crazy, that man. We tried to stop him. We came to save you." She was running toward me, and I saw right through her. She didn't want to hug me. She wanted to use me. She wanted to hide behind my back from the police, to play the role of the grieving daughter, the victim of circumstances. Or maybe, in her sick mind, she thought about taking me hostage, using my body as a shield. She stepped onto the first stair of the porch. I took a step back. My hand with the long carving knife shot up. The blade flashed in the light of the driveway lamp. "Do not touch me." My voice was low, but it held so much steel, so much commanding power, that it drowned out the sirens. It wasn't the voice of a mother. It was the voice of the principal, the one who puts an end to the nonsense once and for all. Simone froze in her tracks. Her hand stopped in midair, inches from me. She looked at the knife, then into my eyes, and she recoiled. She saw there what she feared most in the world, indifference. I didn't love her anymore. I didn't pity her anymore. To me, she had ceased to exist. At that moment, a state police cruiser tore into the yard, followed by another. They boxed in the SUV, cutting off any escape. Marcus jumped out of the first car, wearing a tactical vest with a sidearm drawn. His face was hard and focused. "Stay where you are. Hands in the air." His command hit like a thunderclap. Silas collapsed to his knees in the dust, lace-patterned hands behind his head, blubbering something incoherent. Simone backed away from me, tripped, and fell onto the grass, looking back and forth between me and the armed officers. It seemed over. The villains were caught. Help had arrived. But we forgot the third element of the equation, the man locked in the gas chamber he had created. The hitman in the cellar heard everything. He heard the sirens, the shouts of the police, his employers surrendering. He knew there was no way out through the house. It was a trap. He knew he'd been betrayed, left to die. Panic, multiplied by a desperate survival instinct, pushed him to a final, mad act. On the side of the house, near the ground, was a tiny vent window covered with a grate. It led from the cellar. I heard the crash of breaking glass. He was trying to kick the grate out, trying to burst through. He must have had a heavy tool in his hand, a crowbar or a hammer. He struck the metal, once, twice. The metal struck the stone of the foundation. A spark. Just one tiny, insignificant spark. In any other situation, it would have just flickered out. But the cellar was packed with gas to the limit. The mixture of methane and air had reached the perfect lethal proportion. The world around me exploded. The sound didn't come first. First, the ground under my feet jumped like a living thing getting a shock. The house shuddered through its entire wooden skeleton. A heavy, low roar, born in the depths of the earth, hit the soles of my feet and passed through my bones. "Get down!" Marcus roared, lunging toward me. Orange flames belched from the foundation vents. The windows of the first floor flew outward with their frames, showering the yard in a rain of jagged glass. The blast wave, compressed in the tight space of the cellar, looked for an exit and found it, lifting the house a few inches and slamming it back down with a thunderous crash. I wasn't knocked down by the blast, but by Marcus. He tackled me, pinning me to the porch boards, shielding me with his body. A piece of roofing shingle whistled over our heads. The roar hit my ears, deafening and disorienting. For a second, everything vanished in a cloud of dust, smoke, and the smell of sulfur. Then, a ringing silence. I lay on the porch, looking up at the sky where startled birds were circling. I was alive. The house stood. The old heritage timber, built to last a century, had withstood the blow from within. It groaned, it creaked in all its joints, but it didn't collapse. The cellar had taken the brunt of the blast, its stone walls snuffing the fury of the fire. Marcus sat up, brushing off dust. "Evangeline, are you okay?" I nodded, sitting up. My hands were shaking, but I didn't have a scratch on me. I looked at the yard. Simone and Silas were lying on the grass, heads covered. They weren't hurt either, just stunned and covered in plaster dust. Black smoke was pouring from the cellar window, but there was no more fire. The gas had burned off instantly in a vacuum-like explosion before it could catch the wood. The police were already running to the house with extinguishers, but there was almost nothing left to put out. 2 tactical officers ran to the shattered vent window. They shouted inside, shining flashlights. Then one of them signaled. A minute later, they pulled him out. The hitman. He was alive, blackened with soot, hair singed, clothes turned to rags. He coughed and wheezed, but he was alive. The blast had thrown him against a wall, concussed him, scorched him, but it hadn't killed him. They threw him onto the grass next to Silas. Whimpering in pain, he tried to crawl away, but handcuffs clicked shut on his wrists immediately. "I'll tell everything," he rasped, spitting black bile. "I'll sign everything. It was them. They hired me, her and her husband. They said, 'It's just an old lady.' They said, 'Gas her. Don't shoot, I'm a witness.'" He was selling them out as fast as he could speak, terrified they'd finish him off. I slowly stood up, leaning on Marcus's arm. My legs were like jelly, but I forced myself to stand straight. I walked to the edge of the porch. Simone lifted her head. Her face was smeared with dirt and mascara. She looked at the hitman screaming out his confession, at her husband shaking in a hysterical fit, at the officers already putting handcuffs on her. Then she looked at me. "Mom," she whispered, her lips barely moving. I stood above them all. On my porch, by my wounded but standing house. The smoke from the explosion was slowly clearing, revealing the starlit sky. It was over. The war was finished. I had won, but the price of that victory lay before me in the dirt, bound in iron. The click of the handcuffs sounded louder in the night than the explosion. That dry, metallic sound put a period on the story of my motherhood. I stood on the garden path, feeling the cool evening breeze chill my heated face, watching Marcus, my former student, now my savior, bring Simone's hands behind her back. She didn't go quietly. The realization that the play was over and the curtain had fallen gave her the energy for one last tantrum. She twisted in the officer's grip. Her face, smeared with makeup and dust, contorted into a mask that held nothing human. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, looking at me with wild eyes. "I'm your daughter. I'm your flesh and blood. You gave birth to me. You have to forgive me. Mom, tell them it's a mistake." Her screams echoed through the trees, startling the night birds. Silas, already packed into the patrol car, was muffled, his face pressed against the glass. But Simone kept fighting. She appealed to the instincts she herself had trampled. She tried to press the buttons that had long ago rusted and broken. I took a step toward her. Marcus paused for a second, giving me the chance for a final word. The officers lowered their rifles, sensing the weight of the moment. I looked at the woman I had once rocked in my arms, the one whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the one whose tutors I had paid for while denying myself everything. I searched my heart for a drop of pity, a spark of compassion, but there was only a scorched desert, clean, calm, and empty. "My daughter is dead," I said softly. My voice was as dry as an autumn leaf. "She died a long time ago. I just refused to notice. And you? You're just a stranger who owes me a lot of money for a ruined house and emotional distress." Simone froze, her mouth open. In my eyes, she didn't see tears or anger, only indifference. The most terrifying punishment for a narcissist is to become a blank space. "Take them away, Marcus," I said, turning away. "I want to have some tea." The police cars pulled away, carrying my past to a holding cell. I stood in the yard, breathing in the scent of smoke mixed with the fragrance of night-blooming jasmine. The house behind me, blackened by soot with shattered windows, stood like an immovable rock. We both survived. We were both wounded, but we stood firm. 6 months passed. Autumn had taken hold, painting the woods around the estate in gold and crimson. I sat on the renovated porch, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the maple leaves dance in the air. The house had changed. The cellar, the center of the betrayal, had been cleaned, filled with concrete, and sealed forever. I had erased even the memory that a threat could come from below. The windows gleamed with new frames, the facade was freshly painted, and the kitchen where I had held my ground now had a brand new setup. The renovation was expensive, outrageously expensive. But I hadn't spent a single penny of my retirement. I had kept my word. My civil lawsuit was as ruthless and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. The lawyers Marcus recommended tore through Simone and Silas's assets like sharks. I sued for everything. My daughter's luxury downtown condo, her pride and joy, went under the hammer to pay for the foundation and structural repairs. My son-in-law's expensive SUV was sold to compensate me for emotional damages and legal fees. They sat in prison awaiting trial, penniless and stripped bare. I took from them the very things they tried to kill me for: material wealth. Irony of fate. They wanted my inheritance, and in the end, I got their estate. The circle had closed, but I didn't sit in that big house alone like a hermit. The silence that used to feel like a blessing was now filled with voices. From the kitchen came laughter and the clink of cups. That was Ms. Hattie and Ms. Lucille, 2 retired literature teachers, arguing about poetry. My house had become an unofficial retirement home of sorts. I invited lonely former colleagues, women who had given their lives to teaching and were left in empty apartments in their old age. Here in the countryside, we walked, read, and cooked together. My estate was filled with life, warmth, and purpose. I no longer waited for love from those incapable of giving it. I had created my own family, a family of the spirit, not of blood. The crunch of gravel announced a car. I smiled. Sunday. Marcus stepped out of his car, holding a massive cake. He'd aged in these 6 months. There was more silver at his temples, but his eyes were just as kind. He came every week without being asked or invited, just because he wanted to. "Miss Abernathy?" he called from the gate. "I brought a red velvet, Ms." Hattie complained last time that the store-bought ones were too dry. I found a home bakery. I set my book aside and watched him climb the steps. There he was, my son. Not by birth, but by action. The man who had shielded me from the blast, the man who didn't betray. We drank tea on the porch, talking about nothing, the weather, his grandkids. I felt incredibly peaceful, as if that terrifying night hadn't happened to me, as if it were a scene from a cheap detective novel I'd watched and forgotten. When Marcus left, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, flooding the garden with a soft amber light. I was alone on the porch. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket. The same one that had sat among the white lilies, the one that became my black box and my salvation. I opened the voice recorder app. There was only one file. Party recording. I stared at the name of the file, my finger hovering over the screen. I had kept it all these months as insurance, as a reminder, as proof that I hadn't lost my mind. The investigation was long over. Copies were part of the evidence. Experts had confirmed the voices. This file on my phone no longer had legal power. It only had emotional weight, a heavy, dragging anchor. I pressed play one last time, but I didn't listen. I just watched the time bar move, the green bars of the sound wave jumping. Inside those numbers were encoded hatred, betrayal, and death. Why should I carry this with me? Why should I carry this inside me? I hit pause, then tapped the options and selected delete. The phone asked, "Are you sure? This action cannot be undone." I looked at the garden, at the golden maples, at the windows of my home where a warm light glowed and the silhouettes of my friends moved. I took a deep breath of the clean, sweet air of freedom. "Absolutely," I whispered. My finger touched yes. The file vanished. The screen blinked and showed an empty list. I smiled, feeling an incredible lightness, as if that 50-pound bag of flour had finally fallen off my shoulders. I opened the camera, pointed the lens at the sunset hitting the tops of the pines, glowing in the rays of the dying sun. Click. I needed the storage space. I needed room for new photos. Photos of my new, happy life, where there is no room for traitors. I was finally free. If you liked my story and want to hear more, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to support me, you can do it through Super Thanks. It would mean a lot. In the comments, tell me which city you're watching from and what time it is, so I can see how far my story reaches. I've added 2 more life stories on the screen just for you. Click one now, and let's keep spending time together. Much love, see you soon.